Welcome to Gamers Garden Retro. I'm Seb and I make videos about retro consoles, arcade games, home ports, cult classics and other odds and ends that interest me. Whether at the highest or lowest points of their commercial success, Sega were a fractured company in their approach to home consoles and games, with divisions around the world often working in quite different ways. I started writing a new video about the three main Mega Games compilations for Sega's Mega Drive in the UK, thinking it would just be an overview of all the games included. But I stumbled onto another part of this story of regional Sega ideas, strategies and differences that I had no idea about before. Before we start, I'm giving a shout out to an Instagram pal of mine, London Retro Video Games, who I recently acquired Mega Games 3 from. Check out his channel and Instagram and give him a sub for some really great information and gameplay on all sorts of classic and lesser known arcade games. He has many fantastic custom arcade joysticks and other bits and pieces in his impressive setup, so definitely have a look if you're into your arcade games. And if you haven't already, I'd really appreciate a sub too. Now, let's have a look at where the idea for Mega Games came from. As Sega didn't have any direct distribution lines in Europe when the Mega Drive released here in early 1990, the console launch was fairly unorganised across the continent. But even though it was more haphazard for European gamers, and we wouldn't receive quite as many games as the American Genesis players, the incredibly close fight between the 16-bit Sega and Nintendo consoles in North America wasn't replicated here. Indeed, in the UK, France, Italy and Spain, among other EU countries, the Mega Drive sold considerably more consoles than the SNES, as much as 2-to-1 in some places, and Mega Drive owners bought more games. Aside from being first out of the gate and having more games available for a time, the Mega Drive, and perhaps Sega in general, with the Master System staying popular for so long, also came across as a more cost-effective alternative to the Super Nintendo. Looking back now, it perhaps wasn't this clear-cut really, but I clearly remember at the time being aware that the popular opinion was that Sega home consoles were perhaps better suited to a more cost-aware gamer. And a part of this high-value proposition is where the Mega Games Compilations comes into the story. Mega Games was born from an initiative by then president of the Spanish division of Sega Europe, Paco Pastor. Pastor had been the lead singer of the 60s and 70s pop band Formula Cinco and went on to co-found Arab Software, a Spanish software house in the mid-80s. This coincided with the height of a golden age in Spanish software development for the 8-bit home computer platforms like the ZX81, Commodore 64 and MSX. Arab Software became a giant in its own right, and the largest video game distributor in Spain, even distributing Sega consoles for a time, and would peak when controlling 80% of video game distribution in the whole of Spain. Pastor worked innovatively to reduce software prices to as much as 50% below their retail price and secure distribution deals with the bootleggers and pirates who had previously supplied games to a huge portion of the Spanish market. Indeed, Spain had a notorious piracy scene, and by getting them on board as part of a larger strategy, Arab Software grew the Spanish game market to a whole new level by the early 90s. Low prices and high value are clearly what drove Pastor, and he carried this approach into his role as Spanish Sega president from 1989 to 93. Pastor was a big fan of the Master System, with the value and relatively low barrier of entry it offered gamers, and he believed that 16-bit consoles and home computers often represented too high a price for players and games developers alike. He convinced the head of Sega Europe at the time of the need for a much lower price point for particularly the Mega CD, and this gave him the green light to pitch a lower price point for the Mega CD and Mega Drive directly to Sega CEO Hayao Nakayama in Japan. Pastor travelled to the Sega headquarters, but in this price-cutting endeavour was unsuccessful. He did, however, convince Sega of Japan to produce a mega pack of Sega games for the Spanish region, and starting in 1992, this pack would be released in the UK, across Europe, and even in North America as the first Mega Games compilation. Mega Games 1 is a 3-game compilation meant to appeal to a more budget-focused gamer, or help a new Mega Drive owner quickly increase their library of games at the affordable retail price of about £40. This first compilation includes Columns, Super Hang-On and World Cup Italia 90, 3 recognisable Sega names that are supposed to feel like you're not just buying 3 cheap games slapped together. Whilst looking like a great deal, it's fair to say that Mega Games 1 has the weakest offer of the series. Starting with Super Hang-On, it's certainly the highlight here, and I've briefly covered this before in my Superscaler series. It's a port of the 1987 successor to Hang-On, and although it runs on the original Superscaler board in the arcade, the Mega Drive does an admirable job of replicating the game without any dedicated sprite scaling hardware. Yes, there are cutbacks in that fewer opponents can be on screen with you, there are less scenery objects, and a reduced frame rate with frequent slowdown, but it handles pretty well, has all the stages and music tracks of the original, and given the game's initial release on the Mega Drive in 1989, it was still a pretty good looking game. Now by the time of Mega Games 1 release, Super Hang-On would have felt a little old, but that was the point of this compilation. You got a famous Sega arcade game on their flagship console for a cut price. You can't say the same for the next game though. The irritatingly cheery music that will grace all of the Mega Games compilations comes from World Cup Italia 90, a football game that was localised with a few different names, ours in the UK being a loose branding of the 1990 World Cup in Italy, before being released later as just Sega Soccer. There is little to say here other than it's unenjoyable to play now. I've never spent long getting to know World Cup Italia 90 and I'm not going to start. There's poor controls, a poor field of view, and poor sound, and it makes this a poor addition to Mega Games 1. Things pick up a bit for the third game with Columns. This came to the Mega Drive just 3 months after its arcade debut by Sega in mid-1990. Often seen as Sega's answer to Tetris, Columns makes sense as an addition here, as it's a decent puzzler that brings some variety to the compilation, and it's another recognisable name after already appearing on the Master System, Game Gear, PC Engine and the Japanese home computers by this compilation's release. Columns was first designed by a programmer called Jay Geertsen, who worked for Hewlett-Packard, and differentiating the mechanics from Tetris was not on the software programmer's mind, as the concept for Columns as a form of video game noughts and crosses had already been decided by the time Tetris became popular. It might not have the same enduring appeal as Tetris, but it's satisfying in a similar way. And overall, Mega Games 1 is okay, but it doesn't really deliver, as World Cup Italia 90 is just too poor a game to include. You're left with 2 titles that aren't exactly the highest profile, and it doesn't really deliver on the promise of a high value trio of games. In contrast to this, Mega Games 2 includes entries from 3 very recognisable Sega franchises that any Mega Drive owner would have wanted to play. Releasing in the UK in early '93, the first title in Mega Games 2 is Golden Axe. Arriving on the Mega Drive in late 1990, it was a home port of the already very famous '89 arcade game led by Makoto Uchida, and with Golden Axe 2 already being out for about a year by this point, it fits the bill of being a big name Sega game that's also cheaper to include here. The first Golden Axe is usually the best remembered of the series on the Mega Drive, and with good reason. It was popular, looked close enough to the arcade at the time that it delivered on Sega's promise of bringing the arcade home. The soundtrack is varied and memorable, and it conveys the Conan the Barbarian influence perfectly. It is a short game for the Mega Drive, with one additional 7th stage joining the arcade's 6, but it's 2-player, looks and sounds great, and was exactly the kind of game we wanted to play as kids and would play again and again. And this pretty much applies to the second title in Mega Games 2, Streets of Rage. Like Golden Axe, its sequel was already out, so this nearly 2-year-old game was a good fit for a high-profile budget compilation. Streets of Rage might just seem like contemporary Golden Axe, but it does have elements to differentiate it. There's a slightly wider moveset, more specials and grabs, a variety of weapons you can pick up, longer levels, and the gameplay is famously driven by Yuzo Koshiro's electro club and dance influenced soundtrack. Streets of Rage was Sega's response to the highly rated Capcom belt scroller Final Fight, and although personally I much prefer the sequel, this is another great addition to Mega Games 2, as it's high profile, 2-player and full of replay value. For the last game in this compilation, we go way back to The Revenge of Shinobi, a game that first released in Japan in 1989 for the Mega Drive. It came to the UK a year later, so was still rather old by the time of Mega Games 2's release. And the Mega Drive had received another Shinobi game, Shadow Dancer: The Secret of Shinobi, in mid-91, so this does feel particularly vintage by '93. Of course, The Revenge of Shinobi is well known as being one of the very best Mega Drive games, so it's a great addition here. Also featuring an excellent soundtrack by Yuzo Koshiro, this action platformer has loads of levels that are varied in design, great graphics, a tough but fair challenge, and a wide moveset. It's single player only, and should be taken slow at first to learn how to get through the toughness, so it brings a little variety to Mega Games 2. And if you can put one thing as a negative to this entry in the compilation series, it's having the least gameplay variety on offer. It doesn't go for the range of genres like Mega Games 1 did, but it goes for strong, recognisable Sega franchise that focus on high quality action, and it's much better for it. Mega Games 3, the last in this trilogy arriving in late '93, kind of strikes a balance in variety, although it doesn't quite have a lineup to challenge the quality of Mega Games 2. All three titles are based on Sega arcade games, and are older games, with the first one, Super Thunderblade, being a Japanese Mega Drive launch game way back in October 1988. It's a loose port of the '87 Super Scalar arcade game, and sadly, it's quite a poor early showing of the Mega Drive's power. The smooth scaling effect of the arcade was driven by dedicated scaling hardware, something the Mega Drive lacked entirely, and it often led to very choppy, faked renditions of these kind of arcade games. I still have quite a soft spot for Super Thunderblade, as it's one of the first video games I ever owned, and so I played it a ton as a kid. But I covered it in the PC Engine episode of my Super Scalar video series, and it is quite a poor game to go back to now. Fortunately, it's the low point of Mega Games 3, and things get much better with the second game in the compilation, Super Monaco GP. Based on the '89 Super Scalar arcade game, the Mega Drive version released in early '91, and it greatly expands on the single Monaco-inspired track of the original. It has loose interpretations of all 16 tracks from the '89 Formula 1 World Championship season, alongside a full World Championship mode to play through. By cutting back on the trackside detail, it runs far better than Super Thunderblade. Yes, it makes it look like a poor man's version of the arcade game, but it makes for a much better Mega Drive game to play, and viewed in that way, it also is quite impressive looking. Like Super Thunderblade, it's another single player game, but it's one you can really get stuck into and spend a lot of time mastering the tracks and working through a World Championship, and for that, it's a great value addition to Mega Games 3. And that makes the third game in this compilation the sole two-player entry, Alien Storm. Just like the first game of Mega Games 2, Golden Axe, Alien Storm is a belt-scrolling beat-em-up based on a Makoto Uchida game, released in the arcades in early 1990 and first coming to the Mega Drive in late '91. Like Super Thunderblade, it's a loose port. Although not having as high a profile as either Golden Axe or Streets of Rage, Alien Storm is still a very accomplished two-player side-scroller, with great graphics, enemy designs, a wide moveset, and a wider variety in gameplay than you'd expect from the genre. The alien creatures you face in particular are a highlight of the game, with Uchida's team taking inspiration from 80s Hollywood films when designing them. It's a short game, but an underrated Mega Drive classic, and it's well deserving of a place in this compilation. Mega Games 3 doesn't have any real theme or approach, other than being slightly lesser known Sega games when compared to Mega Games 2. And that's why it's perhaps not as well remembered now. You still got 3 more games that were recognisable at the time though, and presented a good value option to boost your library. And this is where the Mega Games compilations in a traditional sense end. Deep into the Mega Drive's later years in '95, Mega Games 6 was released in some PAL regions. Not a 6th entry in the series, but a compilation of the 6 games from Mega Games 1 and 2. In the same year, Volume 2 would swap out the games from Mega Games 2 for the ones from 3. And finally, a third volume would feature the same games from Volume 1, but swap out Golden Axe for the original Sonic the Hedgehog. These would generally be included in Mega Drive 2 console bundles, underlining the excellent value associated with buying an older system. You got a full collection of games with these bundles, and they varied all the way across Europe, with different regions getting slightly different packs from about the end of '93 right through to the discontinuation of the Mega Drive. The US and Brazil got their own variations of their later Mega Games compilations, although the series name was sometimes dropped. And the Master System even got its own compilation in '93, including Columns, Super Monaco GP and World Soccer. Although catchily labelled as Master Games 1, we sadly wouldn't see any more entries of the compilation series on the Master System. The idea of having a compilation of slightly older games for your system, sold new at a good price, was fantastic, but it's not something that would really keep going on later Sega consoles. The closest we got in the UK was Sega Ages Volume 1 for the Sega Saturn in '96, but this wasn't like having 3 early Saturn games, as these were new ports of older arcade games. Sony would create the Platinum range for the PlayStation. These were games that had sold well on release, and after some time had passed, were re-released under the Platinum brand at the cut price of £20 new. Some shops even had an offer on most of the time, where you could get 2 Platinum games for £30, an excellent deal that I took advantage of quite a few times, and it's the closest example of what Mega Games was doing some years before on the Mega Drive. So the idea for Sega of the Mega Games Compilations, selling a trio of older games at a new budget price, really did end where it began, on the Mega Drive. Pretty much everyone I knew that had a Mega Drive when I was a kid had at least one Mega Games in their collection at some point. It's a footnote of gaming unique to Western Mega Drive owners, and if you trace it back, a Spanish video gaming pioneer with a pop music history called Paco Pastor is the person to thank for it. Thanks for watching this episode of Gamers Gone Retro. I loved finding out about where the Mega Games came from and making this video. If you enjoyed watching, please leave a thumbs up and let me know if you had a Mega Games back in the day and which one you had. Take care, and I'll speak to you next time.